Marco. How are you?
I'm great. Fresh out of the
Fantastic.
shower.
I see that. I could use one precision.
Step by step. All right, let's jump right in, eh?
Yeah, let's dive into it. So you were talking. I don't know, you were talking about the divine feminine and the divine masculine. Because I do definitely feel the same thing, as both of those are necessity. Because as we mentioned in other videos before about the inversion of nature, everything's flipped upside down, and that's I believe that's a very important aspect to get right side up, to be able to heal things, right? To go back to nature, to go back to what's natural, is the optimization of what each expression of electrical charge is. So masculine, electric, feminine being more magnetic. And so coming back to this natural basis is what can help heal things. I do also believe and understand this to be the same thing. Uh, what was your most, because you said it was coming up for you today. What was it that brought it up for you today?
Yeah, what brought it up to me today is that that my partner she's at the Envision Festival right now, and so she yeah literally embodies the divine feminine really strongly, and she says she's working a lot with men there, and it's fascinating because it has a lot to do with forgiveness, to be able to access a balance between the masculine and the feminine. So um, basically, by our belief systems, we think there are certain behaviors that are right and there's certain behaviors that are wrong, and therefore, when we realize that we behave in a way that is deemed wrong, then we feel guilty, and often we cannot resolve the situation, and therefore find ourselves in a dynamic where we cannot fully integrate it or access it, this balanced state, unless we have someone that is in a balanced state and that basically represents this a symbol of forgiveness. So like a lot of the topics that come up for men is like the way that they treated their ex-girlfriends, the way that they treated their parents, the way they treated their friends and family, and so on, just the way that they behave towards the outside world, and how often it is people feel guilty, and when they feel guilty they cannot actually access um, these kind of experiences. So that's really in the field, in the sense of how do we stabilize the balance of the masculine and the feminine within ourselves in order to be able to bring balance to the outside, to the reflection into the
How much
world.
do you think that has to do with trauma? It's like I can imagine, like many things, like certain programs, like how we act to how males act to the outside world. From my understanding of trauma, it tends to be our protective measure that we took in to be able to handle specific things that we went through as a child. So trauma, repeating programs, programmation, and part of, I mean, because for me, I guess it's not necessarily a feeling of guilt, but I do understand the forgiveness of those that traumatized us, that created this specific pattern within us that keeps going, keeps us held back, keeps us in a space that's of outside of authenticity.
Right.
Um,
So yeah, trauma, I
so,
mean, I understand trauma in the way of neurologic de-escalation, which is a movement that comes from Austria, relatively new. And so in the way that they see it, trauma is a lack of what's the word, like a strategy or something, like how to respond towards that situation. And when we don't know how to respond in this kind of situation, it traumatizes us. So trauma is not necessarily, like I almost died, or someone's trying to kill me, or like really dark stuff. It doesn't have to be like that. A trauma can literally just be a lack of options towards the situation, and therefore the brain doesn't have an ability to say, okay, with this approach I can actually resolve the situation. So at the end, trauma, in my understanding, can be released by understanding how to behave in that situation. And I mean, that's one side, because the other, that's on the mental or on the esoteric side, because on the physical side, trauma is also a memory stored in the cells and in the nervous system. And so I know of some people that have specialized into releasing trauma. It's like in the somatic therapies and so on, where you basically shake it out or laugh it out, in order to create enough movement to release the fact that I don't know how to behave in that situation.
Mm.
But important in my eyes is that without an actual change of perspective, in order to see that I do have an option if this kind of situation arises again, it's really difficult to heal trauma. And that's where, I mean, that's what we've been talking about since the beginning, right? The perspective change, the ability to see the same situation in a different light, and therefore suddenly have a new array of options, because I perceive myself within the situation as different as before.
Mm-hmm. Right, and it all comes back to response, by having that broader vision, knowing what to, or different ways to respond. Because my understanding of trauma is like that because we didn't know how to respond. The response that we did out of ignorance, out of self-preservation, out of survival, whatever it is that the details are, becomes hardwired in. Now that becomes our habitual response to similar types of situations. And so
Right.
the perspective change to becoming awareness of like, wait, I do this all the time, or this is what I do in this situation. Now I recognize that. With education, with knowledge, comes a bigger perspective to take a different response.
Right.
Uh,
And it's funny,
yeah.
because like that's the idea of any type of therapy, like as talking therapy, psychotherapy, and so on, where you learn that you can see the situation in a different light, and then you experience the situation in from a different side, and therefore can resolve the issues that are underlying. The only thing is that it takes so much time. Psychotherapy, mirroring of your perception, but within a certain frame of reference. So it's like all these modern approaches of mental health have a very specific way of, like a very materialistic way of perceiving internal that specific framework, trying to reintegrate options within that framework. And yet in the natural environment of in nature, there's way more than just that framework. And I feel that we are like at the precipice of an evolution within mental health, where we understand that we are so much more complex than the normie, like this is how a person is, this is how you're healthy, this is how you're unhealthy. It's like it's very tied into the matrix, in the sense of, if you fit into the matrix and you can interact with the matrix, you're healthy. And if you have views that go away from it, you're not healthy, because you don't fit into that framework, and therefore it's very, very limiting.
Right. Well, yeah, I mean, there's tons to say of like some of the, what do we call it, the schizophrenics, and some of the so-called illnesses of the minds, of which apparently there was times in the past that those people were actually treated as the shamans, because they were in different realms and they could access different information, because that brings them outside of the matrix. They were ostracized and now labeled with a disease. Because it's also interesting, like within nature, like if a gazelle survives a lion attack, they shake it up and then they carry on their way. They're good, right? It's so simple. Just like you said, like shaking it off, vibration, creating a vibration which to take off that problem. But so now it comes in this of like because you first started with your partner and certain belief systems about the masculine. So where were you going with that? Because I feel as if there's a couple of different routes. Because like I know they're part of a new movement of this idea is like polyamory, right? There's no one, you can't just call one yours. And that's also big in the feminism thing, this idea of ownership and stuff. And it's like, wait, but it's not that simple. And it's not that. There is a natural, I believe there is this natural tendency of partnership. And it's not about owning your partner, but there are others out there that argue the other of like men are meant to conquer, and so conquering one, conquering many. There's all these different philosophies in the manscape, right?
Right.
Yeah, it's okay for men to have multiple partners, but it's not okay to have multiple partners. And they do make good points too, actually. Based off of history, based off of human evolution, based off of like kings of old, emperors and things having harems. The idea of a man provides value based off of what he contributes to his community or his family. The woman's value, just like we can see in social media, the woman's value is within their beauty, within their energy. That's why they're so magnetic. That's why you can have a TikTok star that just sits there in front of the camera doing lives and get tons of followers just because she's beautiful and she's they're magnetic. And that, in a way, there's some tainting there. So I guess back to the question of like, what were you going with that before we got into promise? With your partners at the festival, tending to other males.
Well, I believe I was basically getting towards that forgiveness aspect of that when you have an outside witness that witnesses you expressing something that you feel guilty for, then you can actually release it. It's like I can see sometimes that people exclaim that they will never do something again, but then they do it again. And the question arises, why didn't they break the pattern when they exclaimed that they were going to break the pattern or change the pattern? And I believe it has a lot to do with the maybe accountability, but more with being witnessed in one's process, being witnessed in a certain vibrational state where we have a different perspective, basically. And for that, it's very helpful to have someone in front of you, a witness that already is there. So you don't have to explain how to get there. That's the whole idea of holding space, right? It's like I am neutrally here, and I will, listen to whatever you have to say, and I'm not coming from the darker perspective where I'm like, oh yeah, but you could try this and you could do that, but more from a higher level, from a higher mental level or higher being level, higher vibration, where I'm like, this is what you are processing right now, and I feel honored that you process it with me. So I'm listening to it without inserting any of me into the situation. And I think that's what I was going for, really, that aspect of forgiveness and how essential it really is. It's a really, really big part of being able to be neutral. So like if you want to help someone else, if you want to become any type of coach or therapist or whatnot, like you want to help others, but you are involved personally with these topics, then it becomes really difficult to stay neutral. Like, because you remember, it's like back then when whatever something happened that gets triggered in my memory, right, by listening to this, whatever you have to express, and then I cannot stay in that neutral ground to be able to actually hold that space of neutrality.
Because it definitely brings up like judgment. It could bring up judgments. It's like it's getting out of that of the way. What comes to mind actually? Because if we are all one intelligent light, right?
Yeah.
And the personality is the construct. That being of Kyle is the construct personality that has all these experiences and things to say about specific experiences. But like you said, going into that higher being, right, is just being that light. So you as the witnesser are just being a witnesser of someone else's transformation or someone else's healing, right? You're basically, by holding space, you are bringing in something higher. Uh, you could call it, you know, being a window for God to witness the thing, or a window for the cosmic intelligence. It's the holding space is just anchoring spirit.
Right.
And
Because it
for
it
that
it,
to
it
happen, you can't bring in yourself. Go ahead.
exactly, yeah, it points at that balance between the masculine and the feminine. So I because it's not just a duo, it's a trio, right? It's like it's three aspects that come out of the two being in balance, and that like there's two polar opposites, masculine and feminine, and when they come together, they create the child, and the child is the ultimate playfulness, because a child feels safe, a child feels curious about the world, in awe, and therefore goes explore, because it's not wondering, oh, where I'm gonna get food today. It's like, well, when food's ready, mom or dad are gonna call me, and then I'm gonna eat, or I can go to them and be like, hey, can you give me something to eat? So I feel that there's this balance point between the masculine and the feminine that we all carry. We all have masculine and feminine sides, because they're this idea of receptivity on the feminine side and action, inspired action, on the masculine side. And when they come together, that's the balance point that is the child, the holy child, basically. That um, that is the actual goal, so to say. So that even in a relationship, like when the parents are not not in peace with each other, when they have issues with each other, when they don't have forgiveness for each other, when they carry on topics from, oh yeah, but you were looking after this other female when we were, walking down the street, and I remember that, and I'm jealous, or whatever. Like there's some kind of judgment, there's some kind of, maybe I take it personal. It's like, oh, maybe I'm not beautiful enough anymore. I need to catch his attention again. All these dynamics express in the child, and the child becomes like, I remember, as when I was a child, I would always know how my parents felt, or what was going on, like not what was going on, but that something was going on. It was always clear whether there was harmony, or it was like slightly off, or very much off. And as a child, I thrived upon the dynamic of being harmonious. So like the best memories of my life were when we went to holiday. It's like, oh, we're at the beach, and it's all nice, and like there's nothing to worry. The parents are not stressed, and suddenly there's all this space to explore, and so much trust and love, because they were in a relaxed and balanced state. And and so I feel that the whole, this whole dynamic, like the whole gender dynamic as well, like masculine and feminine, like, because you said before about, or talked about the feminism. um, any ism is difficult, because it focuses on one aspect instead of the balance, because the balance is a process. The balance is not like, to raise a child is a process. It's, okay, I raised it for 3 weeks, so now I can let it go. Like, even when a child is 18, it will still be moments where the child is like, oh, I feel heartbroken or something. Hey, dad, can you be there for me? Like, and that's a natural part of the balancing of energies within a social system, in this case the family. And when we take that in a larger scale, as like men and women, and the dynamic between them, then there's a lot of confusion, because it's not clear how to balance it, because there's so much contradictory information of, what does it mean to be a man? What does it mean to be a woman? Especially because it's so reduced to certain types, like certain aspects of masculinity and femininity, that it's easy to identify with, oh, but I don't have enough abs to be considered a man. I don't have enough beard to be considered a man, or my boobs are too small. I'm an ugly woman. All these kinds of judgments all of these need forgiveness, especially for oneself. Like, oh wow, I thought I'm not beautiful because XYZ, and therefore I basically block down all of these beautiful impulses that can come through when I accept myself the way that I am. And so to take it on the bigger level, like, all right, I'll give you the question. On a bigger level, what is going on there? What is this dynamic between masculine and feminine that is out?
For me, because like you said, it's a process. And I've always kind of looked at it cosmically way of like, it's the friction that creates energy, right? Because of that process, and each side is working on each other, and it creates a friction. This is where like fights or arguments and like disagreements and having to accept, compromise, be empathic to other people's points of views. So you have to open yourself with each little, like, okay, we've chosen to work together in this life and to be a partnership. There's a static that's created. I'm me, she's her, and there's always this not always, but there's a process and that process is intended to create that balance of, like you said, masculine and feminine with each individual partnership, and that is like the energy of creation. That's the way I look at it as well.
Right.
Because there's
but like within so maybe to hone in a little more close within the social construct, within the social organism, we have a certain dynamics that we perceive as really masculine. Like this is a this is an awakened man, and yeah, and this is a balanced female. Like what does that entail? What does that mean? Because I see that a big part of that trauma response that we are seeing in the world comes from you can you can step out of the process by reaching something. So you marry, you have a house, you have a child, you have your fence, your garden, whatever, your lawn, and therefore you've done it. You are an achiever. You have reached the goal of being alive, but that is not really the answer. It's like that's
because
what
you'll
you
still have a
just
lack. You'll feel a lack of self. Of like, is this it? Is this all there is? Right now, that's where start to pursue more things and starting businesses, and that's not. But it all does come down to what was coming up to me when you're talking about forgiveness. It's like it's about forgiving ourselves from our past and the things that we did to become part of the herd, to normalize ourselves within that structure, right? And the whole point of the forgiveness or coming back to that balance is to find that authenticity of self-expression, because there is no awakened man. Because you're a man and you want to be awakened, you must act this. It's not true, right? Because each individual is a unique expression of
exactly.
energy. So it all comes back to finding authenticity, who you are. Yes, the masculine body. Yes, maybe because even masculine people, spirits within a masculine body may have more of a feminine nature to them. That is a thing, and vice versa. So it's and I think that's to simplify the forgiveness of oneself, or the forgiveness of the way we are, what we've done in the past, is to come back home, which that home isn't anywhere else but here and now.
Right, and we find ourselves in a dynamic where we believe we have to reach somewhere. We have to walk over there. Like where I'm at right now, I will not get the answers, so I have to go somewhere else to receive the answers. And instead of understanding that wherever I go, I'll still carry the issue. It's just a different reflection, a different environment that might help me to see myself in a different light. But I'm still the same person. It's still reflecting back onto me. But it is helpful to therefore to step out and to see what is my authentic expression, because that's also a big question, right? What is your authentic expression? Is Is that me wanting to dance right now, to get up and shake it? Is that actually my impulse? Or is that something I saw in a movie or in, heard in a man's, someone was like, oh yeah, I danced it all out. And it's like, oh wow, yeah, that's an option. Maybe I want to do that. And so it presents itself as a possible solution for the situation. And therefore I could follow thinking that this is my impulse rather than, well, actually, I just heard about it and I want to try it out, but I don't know whether or not this is my impulse. I have to see. So
But it still carries that invitation to experiment. I mean, to do it, but not doing it thinking that this is the answer. Like, oh, okay, in this circle, it was mentioned to dance, and dancing is their way. Okay, I'll take that. I'll try dancing, perhaps. Maybe that's fine. And then, like, oh, it doesn't. That's not the time, because that is a tricky thing. What is authentic impulse? What is programmed reaction? What is habitual tendencies? What are, because it's like, oh, a heroin. Oh, I really want to do heroin. That's my impulse.
Right.
But is it? It is. At the same time, it is. But, and so that's where it gets really funny. Of like, where's the line of authentic impulse and doing what's right? Just starting over in a way. Like I see it where there's the two minds, right? You mentioned personality and higher self, higher mind. And from what I see, like there's two voices in the head usually. There's the one that says, going back to the heroin. Oh, I want to do heroin. But then there's the other voice that's a little bit smaller. That's like, but that's not best for you. Right? So you have these split voices. You have these two voices, and the way I kind of see it now, it's like it's whatever one is trying to be for the best benefit for you is the voice that should be listened to.
Right.
Does that make sense?
It does make sense. I believe that the issue there is that we've never really, like, we find ourselves when we grow up in a society, in any society really, that we have to conform. We have to like normalize ourselves to a certain degree in order to fit in enough to be able to communicate or make sense of our experience. And the receptivity necessary to actually perceive whether this is my impulse or this is just an outside expectation that I'm fulfilling, like a people pleasing in a way, in order to stay in this like social dynamic, requires a lot of honesty, really, to be so honest to oneself that that you can perceive it. It's like I used to work with this shaman from Bulgaria, and he gave me this analogy where he was saying, our consciousness is like the sea. Here's the bottom of the sea. The what is it called? Like the bottom of the sea.
Bedrock.
The bedrock.
Sea floor.
Right.
Yeah.
The seafloor. Yeah, exactly. And then there's the surface. And when an impulse reaches the surface, it comes out as an expression. But then the whole sea from between the bedrock and the surface, there's all these impulses swimming around, and you might pick one that's like, oh, I choose this to be me right now because this looks like fun. Let's see what happens when I follow that to the surface, to then realize, well, actually I don't really like it. And the ability to be able to observe throughout all of this whole sea, like kilometers of sea, all these impulses you ignore, and you just look at the bedrock, and it's like, there's this tiny little movement of something. I'll follow that. It starts moving further and further up until it reaches the surface, and now I can trust to authentically express this impulse because I know it's mine. It came from my core, from my bedrock, and not from somewhere from the sides where it just swam in and was like, oh yeah, wouldn't it be fun? It's like, yeah, it would be, but that's not my true impulse. So the ability to discern really comes from the receptivity to actually realize whether this is my own impulse or not.
Yeah. Well, so how would you discover that? Of like, I mean, as the idea of like, okay, sifting through all these influences that we have, movies, video games, social conditioning, different cultures, cultural norms, blah, 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 genetic expressions they're carried on. Like, yeah, I mean, that's part of the exercise, right? Is to like focus in, like, okay, here's this, where does that come from a movie, and then sit that out, throw that out, just kind of sink deeper. So when I say sink deeper, that goes into meditation, right? So having to meditate, having to observe all the thoughts, all the impulses that come through, taking the time to observe them and let them go, but also discern.
Yeah, it's a tricky one. And now we can go back to the brain hemispheres, the masculine and the feminine side, because it needs the receptivity of the right brain, but the right brain doesn't know. Like there used to be these experiments 100 years ago, whatnot, when they would cut the cord between the two hemispheres of the frontal lobe, when people had like seizures and stuff like that. And then they would experiment with these people and realize that depending on where their dominant side is, the left or the right brain, the masculine or the feminine, depending on that, they would be able to interact with things in a different way. So if the right brain, the feminine brain, is more dominant, then people would know how, like, what a screwdriver, for example, what it's used for. They would know, well, if I have that thing that you gotta, move in, then that's the tool for it. And if someone is in the left brain dominant, they would know the name, but they would not know what to do with it.
Mm.
And obviously, only if those two come together, you can actually make sense. Because if I cannot say to you, hey, why don't you use a screwdriver? Then you'd be like, oh yeah, that's a great idea. I was trying to do it with my fingers. It didn't work well. But if I'm just in the right brain and I'm like, hey, why don't you use that thing that you need to use in order to put that screw in, then I don't make sense. It's like, why don't you use the stick with the shape at the tip? It's like,
Right. You can describe it,
but it's not clear what I mean. And that's what I mean with the balance between those two sides, where when they come together, then I know that a screwdriver makes most sense now, and I know how to call it. And therefore, I can actually make sense within my communication. So it's like someone that is really in their right brain completely, they don't even make sense anymore. Like a sentence wouldn't make sense because I'm not coming from the level of the left brain where everything is structured and it has a specific shape. I come from the emotionality of it. So I try to present a solution, but it might be that one word comes from a song that I heard, and the next word comes from an expression that I saw in a boy this morning, and the next word comes from something I just dreamed about. And obviously, these three words together will create a sentence that doesn't make any sense to the left brain. The left brain is like, whoa, what? Like these three words don't. What are you talking about? And so that's where I see where the balance really needs to come together in order to, yeah, actually make sense.
so how does one find balance within this realm then?
Yeah,
Go
okay,
ahead.
so I think that's where we come back to rhythm, where when we are really fast paced, then it's really difficult to catch every impulse that comes through our awareness. It's like if you are, you only have 20 minutes to finish whatever it is you're doing, and then you suddenly feel a different impulse. It's easy to miss it because you are focused on a specific thing. But when you slow down your rhythm to a level where, but I just did the thing that I wanted to do, and now I have nothing to do because I don't actually feel an impulse to do anything. I'm just sitting here looking around. I'm just enjoying being rather than doing. and therefore I can catch any inspiration that comes in. And I mean, that's the whole idea of meditation, is to just to slow down your whole system enough that you're able to catch your own impulses, or like what is going on inside of you, rather than having 100 voices in your head that is like, oh, but I could go jump into the pool right now. I should feed the dogs. What about that message that my ex-girlfriend sent me 4 weeks ago? I should answer that. Oh, it's going to be my mother's birthday in 3 weeks. I should prepare something for her. And all of these things will create this like mishmash of impulses that I'm like, what I'm going to do next. Whereas when I slow down enough to like, what do I feel like doing next? Then it's way easier to be like, oh, I want to listen to music right now. Oh, what do I want to listen to? Ah, let's listen to Beethoven. Okay, wow, all right. And then suddenly I have a fulfillment of my own impulses, and therefore I have a direct feedback system of whether my perception was accurate or not. Because maybe I don't feel like Beethoven, and that was just another impulse that swam into my field, and I'm like, oh yeah, Beethoven. Is like, what Beethoven? No, I feel like listening to heavy metal actually. Why Beethoven is not heavy metal at all? And so it comes down to the rhythm, to slow down our rhythm enough to be able to perceive what is actually happening. And if we look into nature, nature is almost never in a rush. Like, things are kind of pretty chill, like a tree doesn't grow faster because it's like, oh no, I gotta achieve this thing. No, it works with what it has, with the nutrients and the minerals and so on. What it has that sunlight that it has the water that it has, and it works with that, which is really being in tune with their own rhythm. Whereas in an artificial rhythm, it's like, it's so easy to, hey, but I could watch some TikTok videos, or like do so many things. So it's like analysis paralysis, where I have so many options that I'm kind of like, it's too much going on. So slowing down for me is the main approach to bring the masculine and the feminine inside together.
Right. And I guess just to like, because there's the mixture, so there's the slowing it down to allow things to come in and all these different things, and then there's the sifting through, and then the taking action on something that's there. Because I think the missing piece is also like intention. Like, what do you want to? What are your goals? Because I know you mentioned goals, and this might be contradictory, but still, like, what do you want to achieve in a specific time frame? And the whole having that intention of like, okay, I want to do this thing, and then sitting and receiving all the impulses of things that can get up to there, and then it's like, okay, then sifting through what the impulses there that'll help you to achieve that thing you want to achieve. Is that also a part of it too, or is it just like?
Oh, absolutely. It's like two parts of a circle. It's like, okay, I have the receptivity. I know that this is what I want to do now. But if I don't actually do it, then it's like a sender and a receiver. It's like, you can have the best antennas to send out information to the world that ever have been invented. If there's not a receiver, you can send all day long and nothing will happen. Nothing will come out of it. So it's like this law of resonance, that you need something that can actually receive that impulse in order to fulfill it. And obviously that needs the masculine side of, okay, this is what I'm going to do now. I am going to send out this impulse. But then again, it needs the receptivity to see whether the impulse, like I chose an accurate volume, an accurate approach, an accurate vector of what I want to achieve. Or I might need to fine tune it, because within the action of doing it, the masculine aspect, I'm still connected with my feminine enough to see whether I'm actually right on track or I'm slightly off. And therefore, like I have a resistance that I gotta push through, rather than, wait a minute, why is there resistance? And that comes down to slowing down again. Wait, there is resistance. Okay, I need to fine tune just like this 1 degree so that I'm back on track. And now I can step into the masculine again and just follow that impulse. until something comes through the receptivity again. And so that's how we complete the circle. And the circle then is the child. It's the space of exploration. Like the child can, within the circle of the masculine and the feminine, it can totally explore and do its thing, and try out something innovative, but it has a specific framework. It's like, just today I listened to this near-death experience video of this guy from the States, and he basically, the way that he described God, I thought was really interesting. He said God is a child. It's a very childlike consciousness that created everything. It's not very interested in like the perfect system on the, it's like, yo, what happens if, like, oh. And so it likes games. And the very nature of games is its rules, it's its limitations. A game is a set of limitations that are accepted by everyone playing the game in order to have fun with the game. And so that's how I like. I think it's a great analogy for life. It's a game, but it's a game for a child. It's very simple. It's very simple or simplistic in a way, because it just wants to see how you're gonna interact with a certain dynamic that you find yourself in, and not are you able to create the perfect masculine system that will help you to have the answer for any kind of situation, the golden bullet. It's like, no, it's not about the golden bullet, it's about the experience rather than.
So like an input, it's an input output. So being receptive to every output, to receive an input and see how it's going, and then to if you have to fine tune or not.
Right, and what comes
something
with it. Yeah.
Go ahead.
I just wanted to say that the thing is that in this realm that we find ourselves in, that we are speaking to each other right now, we have a delay. So it's like when you look at the torus and then you are at the center, and so you send out an impulse, it will still need time to come into the receptivity part. You send it out, but then it needs time to actually arrive. And if you lose track on the way, then suddenly you receive an impulse, like that impulse that you send out, and it comes back, and you're like, oh, what is this? I'm surprised, because I didn't pay attention of that impulse going around and now coming back.
Mm-hmm. So something else, another question came up from before, you talking about nature, how it's really calm, there's not a lot going on, the tree grows as fast as it's going to grow, but then the idea comes of, like, us as human beings are quite different. We are nature, but we have the ability to augment things. We can add fertilizer to that tree. We can add nutrients to that tree to help it to grow faster, to grow stronger, to produce more fruit. There's different things we can do. And I'm not just speaking of like chemical stuff, but just natural, through engineering, through knowing how the system works, we can fine tune the system to actually make it work more efficient, right?
Right.
Efficient energy management. That's one of the things that we as humans can do. And I was just wondering if there was a correlation that could be applied within the system of like, okay, input, output is, and if it is nature-based, so is there a way to augment, enhance?
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, I would say that our augmentation towards the most efficient, following the impulse all the way around, so it comes until it comes back. So I know whether this actually makes sense or not, because you could put fertilizer on a tree because you think that this is what the tree needs, but it actually didn't need more nutrients. It needed less water. It has too much water in the dirt, and you're like, I need to put more, because you follow an impulse that is actually an illusion. And so I would say that our augmentation is to go back to the natural way of following that impulse completely, so that I actually see whether this makes sense or not, rather than I know what this tree needs and I'm gonna give it to it. Especially coming from a setup where there's so much make believe or illusion, really, that stepping out of these belief systems that don't serve the purpose of my action is the highest augmentation I can actually follow, because nature in of itself, it never wastes energy. It is very, very, very efficient. It's literally the most efficient system that we can observe, because if I look around, then yeah, it's working. And therefore, I like when I observe societal systems, they hardly ever are working. Like, yeah, the idea of a school is brilliant, to go somewhere and have someone that is more experienced teach me how to do things. That's a great idea. But in reality, we find that the school system is not working. It's like at a fraction of the potential that it actually have. And so stepping out of these fake systems into the actual system, the natural, is what is the highest augmentation that we can step into.
Right, that
That's
makes
my
sense. Yeah, yeah, because it is a natural process. It's a whole, something that you don't even see. You put an impulse out there, you do a thing, you have to sit and wait for it to come back to you. The reaction, action, reaction, input, output.
And
And
just to add to it, it's like that's why I believe, like, science, when empirical science came in, that was such an important point. Because if I'm a gardener and I have like a specific plant that I want to grow, and I'm not sure what the plant needs, but I have 100 of those plants, of this plant, 100 versions of it, like 100 times growing it there, and one I give, you know, 1 liter of water, another one I give half a liter of water, another I give 5 liters of water, and I document everything, then after a season or two, I see very clearly what worked and what doesn't, what is too much water and what is too little water, just to simplify it down to the water thing. And I believe that this simplification is what we are really struggling with, because it needs a lot of effort to be able to say this is what the tree needs. Because through experimentation, I have an empirical evidence that shows me that this is what the tree needs. Because if I look at, it's obvious. This one out of 100 is the one that grew the tallest. And then I can do a second round and be like, okay, let's grow a couple with this parameter, but let's see, less shade, more shade. Because it's not just water. There are millions of parameters that can be implemented. Well, maybe not millions, but like a lot of parameters, and each one can influence the whole situation. I mean, there's like this old saying, right, that if you like play classic music to a plant, then it grows better. Or if you talk to your plant and you give it like love and attention, it grows better. And it's like, what is that? What is that dynamic that is playing out there, rather than a science, like the pure scientific, okay, it needs this amount, this amount, this amount. But there's what I'm trying to say here right now is there are certain things that are not measurable that also come into the equation, because we don't have a language to actually measure these kind of things, and therefore they don't seem plausible or important.
or yeah, or we even, like in the past, cutting it out of the equation because we can't measure it, so we're not even consider looking into it.
Yeah.
It doesn't exist, exactly. Ah, right. Just interesting. Yeah, and it just goes back up to that, and I guess it's just like scientific experimentation. So like, okay, here's an impulse, here's an intention, here's the impulses that come. I'm going to put this impulse. This is the date I put it in. This is what I did. You know, treating ourselves and our own act of creation as a scientific endeavor. Okay, this is what I've done. This is what I did. And here's the response. I mean, that's why we have like analytics within, you know, marketing, video stuff. Like, okay, here's the video. Here's how it did, and changing things up. They offer that ability, even like, okay, here's marketing. You can do it this way, that way. See which one works the best, and it's something that we can apply to ourselves. Okay, taking this, you know, that's part of the whole journaling process, right? The importance of journaling is to document and write down the impulses that come in, what we did and how we got feedback. So if we responded to our partner in a specific way, what was the feedback? Another day, the same thing happens and responded a different way. What is the feedback? And from there, we find, like you said, originally, that the balance. Like, okay, we're going to find this balance by seeing. So oftentimes we forget. Next day, we forgot what we did. We forgot what happened. We forgot how we responded. And so we keep the repetition going. And so that's actually a good way to put it. Like, okay, treating ourselves as our own scientific endeavor. How much water do we need, or how much effort do we need in this specific thing? How much rest do we need? What is it this body actually needs? Because it is the plant that we are taking care of.
Right, and then comes the next step, which is once we come to a conclusion, to understand that this is not the solution forever, it's the solution for now, for the dynamic we find ourselves in right now. Because even a tree, like a tiny little sprout, has totally different conditions it needs than a 50-meter tall tree. It's like, oh, but that's so weird that this big tree died out of thirst because I've kept giving it the 300 milliliter of water that it needed when it was a sprout. It's like, yeah, but it doesn't apply anymore. And I think that's where this oversimplification of our mind comes in, where our mind wants to reach the solution rather than understanding everything as a process. And so it's like, I solved the equation. That's it. I have a clear answer. And that's very mathematic, like our left brain. That's how it works, right? It's like, I have an answer. This is it. I will forever apply this answer to any like similar situation, not understanding that every situation is unique and every situation needs a certain amount of effort to find out what it actually needs right now. And even if I find it, it's just a stepping stone. We never actually arrive, because it's not about arriving, it's about the process of, or the experience of how to, yeah, what we experience on the way.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's a whole social structure thing as well, of like the ability to change and adapt to new circumstances, because things are always changing. Science has dealt with that issue for a long time. Uh, and this well documented. We understand the Earth was flat in the day and sailing off, all these things that we now know as, or maybe not know, who knows anymore.
Right.
Maybe it's still flat. It's been flat all along. But yeah, the ability to adapt to new environments, new situations.
And
But
especially
I think that
when we take into account what we talked about in our last episode, the holographic universe idea, that everything comes back, like it's a reflection of our internal process. And because we're never the same, we're always changing, we always need to inquire to a certain degree. Because it's never a repetition, really. Even if I do the same thing, but I have changed, I'm a bit different. Like yeah,
yeah.
it's fascinating, and that's something where that we also can play with, or that we actually do play with. Like I remember when when I had a restaurant and was working in my kitchen and cooking, and then one day I was wearing like a heavy bracelet with like big jade beads, and it kind of like got in the way all the time. I would hit things with it, because usually I don't wear any jewelry when I cook, but I really enjoyed wearing it because it changed the dynamics slightly and made me more aware of how I'm moving. It took me out of the autopilot of like, this is how I'm gonna do it, bop, 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 bop. But then suddenly it moves in a certain way that gives me a new impulse that makes me realize, no, wait a minute, things are slightly different, therefore it needs the attention that it needs. And I feel that that's part of our co-creative process, that we basically, the game idea, that we limit ourselves in a certain way to stay, so it stays interesting. It's like when we play a game and then it's like, oh yeah, it's boring, we play cops and robbers or something. It's like, oh yeah, but for some reason it's a boring dynamic. Then someone can be like, hey, I have a new rule that whenever the first 2 minutes we got to run backwards, whatever. It's like, yeah, that's a great idea, yeah, let's try that. And suddenly the game is exciting again because it actually got limited more. We introduced a new rule that makes it more interesting. And so this adaptation towards the situation and the limitation that we introduce in order for it to stay interesting, that's a very, very human thing. Because one day I might feel like I need a lot of space to play, and another day I feel like, I need very little space to play. Today I feel like inserting a lot of rules upon the games that are around me, and another day I feel more receptive and I feel like, I'm going to accept whatever comes around. I'm not going to insert my own rules because today I don't feel like it. And this dynamic, we always have a choice. I can always say like, let's try something else. But I always have the choice to say, I'm just going to stick with this and see what happens. And I feel that this boils down to where we're talking about balance again, to be able to wait until the moment that I actually feel inspiration. So that I'm bored with a game, but I don't have a new rule. So instead of just being a cancel culture guy and be like, this game is boring, I'm out. Be
I
like,
don't like its rules.
yeah, exactly. But I also don't have anything to contribute, a new rule that could make it interesting, at least for me. If I don't have that, then what am I contributing? What is happening here? But the ability to stay in that paradox of like, I want to change it, but I don't know how, until I feel how to change it. A new rule comes up. Oh, wow, wait, that's a great idea. Now I can say it. But sometimes or often we need a certain amount of pressure to achieve that. It's like, I feel this is not really fulfilling. But instead of making a hasty decision of just stepping out, which is really just like the illusion of a shortcut, like, yeah, I'm just going to step out. Instead of that, staying there until an impulse comes through. And this is something that I see, in this like smaller and smaller attention span that we are, that is happening.
Developing over time.
Developing, yeah, exactly, or accepting. That's like fundamental within that. That is like, it's easier to turn off something than be like, why does that have the effect that it has? So this inquiry aspect gets thrown under the bus because I don't get the instant gratification or dopamine hit that I expect to receive from the game.
Yeah. Yeah. Very interesting. So I'm gonna have to go here soon.
All right.
I mean, that's a pretty good ending point there. But because it's all choice, inquiry. Why do we do things? Why do we feel things? Like, again, becoming the scientist of our own energetic phenomena. Yeah. And
Yeah.
treating it
So
as a game, like adding rules of like, okay, this is what I usually do. Okay, I don't feel fulfilled. Let's change it up. Let's throw a rule in. Let's throw
a
something in.
limitation in. And that's something that we need to understand, that that playing a game means to limit ourselves even further. Every new rule makes it more limited, our options, and therefore it just funnels it down towards the joy that we actually want to experience. Yeah, it's an interesting paradox that the more we limit ourselves, the clearer the game becomes.
Right. Because that's what I was just thinking. I know many people might think of like, but that limits my freedom now because I'm limited. But you're right. In a way, it is. What was it? What was you gave a good definition of science, and perhaps we can end with that of like everything that's false. We have to take away everything that's false to come to the truth. It's not about finding the truth.
It's eliminating the falsification. Like it literally comes down to, for science, that if I cannot prove it wrong, then it might be right. But I'm always looking to prove it wrong in order to see whether it's it's close to the truth or not. And if I cannot take anything away anymore, it's like, I have no avenue of proving it wrong, then I have to accept it at least as a hypothesis that looks like it's working with the data points that we have right now. But the goal of a scientist is to prove it wrong, literally,
Right.
not to prove it right, because that's easy. That's easy. You just take like, oh, if I throw away 90% of the data points and I focus on cherry pick certain data points, hey, I have proven my hypothesis. And that is what we are perceiving now, this dumbing down of the scientism community, that is like,
Right.
but why would I accept data points like a near-death experience? It's like, it's fascinating to hear the stories of people like you and other people of like, wow, this is so interesting that is your experience, or it was your experience, and therefore that is a data point that needs to be included, rather than no, that's just make believe, a hallucination, like you dreamed it or whatever, and therefore I don't need to integrate that data point into the scientific perspective that I'm developing for myself for that science experiment Darko.
Right. And this leads me, I want to, I guess, end with like the dogmatism, because even if you take everything that's false and you're trying to prove it wrong, and like, oh, there's nothing we can prove, it can't be proved wrong now, so it's true. Yes, but still remain with the open mind, because new data is always coming. And so maybe at some point in time in the future, now it's proven wrong, and now so is that, yeah.
And just as a final thing to kind of like bring it back to the masculine and the feminine, it's like when I'm overly in the masculine and it's like I found out the solution for this experiment and I'll just go with it, and I don't have the receptivity to actually make sure whether or not there's new data coming in, that's when it started to crystallize down or to become stagnant, basically. And if I'm just listening for new input, but I'm not actually apply the new information that I've received, then it also becomes unbalanced. And so
Right.
it needs what each of us need to apply their personal way of balancing action and receptivity in order to bring the masculine and the feminine together, to balance them and create that space for the inner child to explore and experience.
Mm.
Boom.
Beautifully said, sir.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
With that,
let's take it like that, and looking forward to our next conversation.
should be next week, every Thursday, pretty much. Oh, yeah.
Exactly. Yes.
Perfect.
Amazing. All right, brother.
All right.
I'm sending you much love, and yeah, and we talk soon.
All right. All right, bro.
Cool, man.
Bye.
Bye
Bye,
bye.
everybody. ¿Dónde está? Aquí está.